Look, if I had been caught trumpeting pro-Kremlin talking points, I guess saying I did it of my own volition is slightly less worse than saying I got paid $100,000 a throw to stay stuffed by the FSB.
Welcome to Law and Chaos, with a big emphasis today on the chaos. Vladimir Putin is doing his damnedest to get Trump elected again so that America will abandon Ukraine and let Russia rebuild its empire, or at the very least, get out of this disastrous war. But unlike in 2016, President Biden isn't letting the Russians get away with it this time. He's indicting those Kremlin agents renting out right-wing influencers like Benny Johnson, Dave Rubin, and Tim Pool, and the president is rolling up the online influence campaign one fake website at a time. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get after it. Hey guys, I'm Liz Dye. With me as always is Andrew Torres. Andrew, how are you?
Well, I am all right, trying to keep up with the news, which shows no signs of slowing down. And of course, today is going to be the only presidential debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. So I'm looking forward with slight trepidation to that one.
Do you think it will really be the only one? I feel like they're going to, I think they'll agree to another one in October.
We'll see. My money's on one.
All right. Well, I guess we'll find out. But as usual, Donald Trump is doing his best to undermine American democracy, even without Putin's help, although sometimes with it. Let's go to the source here. He says, cease and desist. I, together with many attorneys and legal scholars, am watching the sanctity of the 2024 presidential election very closely because I know better than most the rampant cheating and skullduggery that has taken place by the Democrats in the 2020 presidential election. It was a disgrace to our nation. Therefore, the 2024 election, where votes have just started being cast, will be under the closest professional scrutiny. And when I win, those people that cheated will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences so that this depravity of justice does not happen again. We cannot let our country further devolve into a third world nation, and we won't. Please beware that this legal exposure extends to lawyers, political operatives, donors, illegal voters, and corrupt election officials. Those involved in unscrupulous behavior will be sought out, caught, and prosecuted at levels, unfortunately, never before seen in our country. So that's cool.
Yeah, that's great. Nothing like promising to delegitimize the election you're going to lose in advance.
And he also had this one yesterday. He posted this on his janky social media platform. He said, an interview by Tucker Carlson of an election expert indicates that 20% of the mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania are fraudulent. Here we go again. Where is the U.S. Attorney General and FBI to investigate? Where is the Pennsylvania Republican Party? We will win Pennsylvania by a lot unless the Dems are allowed to cheat. The RNC must activate now.
Wonder Twin Powers activate. I mean, look, this will not be the only 80s cartoon reference in the show today. No, but that cannot possibly be a sensible sentence. There aren't mail-in ballots at this point in time. There aren't any that have been processed. How could you begin to say that 20% of them are fraudulent? I mean, this is just, we don't like democracy and we're greasing the skids for when we lose. It's terrifying.
Yeah. All right. And in further Trump news, on Friday, September 6th, Justice Juan Merchan postponed the sentencing of Donald Trump on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in New York for that 2016 hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. The sentencing had been scheduled for Wednesday, September 18th. It will now take place on November 26th, 3 weeks after the election. Justice Merchan's rationale for this is explicitly political, although he says politics should not play a role. In accordance with certain of the grounds submitted by defendant Trump and the reasons for adjournment provided by the people, that's the district attorney, coupled with the unique time frame this matter currently finds itself in, the imposition of sentence will be adjourned to avoid any appearance, however unwarranted, that the proceeding has been affected by or seeks to affect the approaching presidential election in which the defendant is a candidate. The court is a fair, impartial, and apolitical institution.
No, this decision is not impartial. It is not apolitical. It deprives the voters of a crucial piece of information that they ought to know before deciding whether they're going to vote for Donald Trump. And that is, does a sitting judge think that former President Trump, who has been convicted of 34 felonies by a jury of his peers, deserves to be incarcerated for his crimes. Like, that's a thing I think, if I don't know who would be on the fence and considering Trump at this point in time, but that's a piece of information that they ought to have. And there is a way to do that without, quote, interfering, affecting with the election, right? And that is, you impose the sentence on September 18th, and then you stay the effect of that judgment pending the election, right? You can do it.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with you on any of that, to be honest. I mean, I agree with you on the part where you said this is not an apolitical, impartial decision, right? Because Justice Merchan, says, I don't want to be political, but I am going to change the date of this sentencing in deference to the political calendar.
Yeah.
I do not think that the court owes a duty to the voters to tell them, the judge's opinion about whether Trump should be incarcerated before the election. I think that would also be a political consideration. I think that the answer is it shouldn't be postponed out of deference for the political calendar. Trump himself postponed it with, shenanigans throughout this trial. And we wouldn't be on the eve of the election if Trump hadn't done things like on the eve of the trial, which was supposed to start in March, he made a grossly false claim of prosecutorial misconduct and secured 4 weeks delay. Well, we wouldn't be here now if it weren't for Trump. And so I don't think that it should be delayed because I think the delay is explicitly political. But I don't agree with you that we, the voters, have the right to the judge's ruling.
Yeah, let me parse that a little more carefully. I'm not saying that Justice Merchan should move up sentencing in order to give, right? Like, it's not that he has an affirmative obligation to do so. It is that by ostensibly being apolitical, by pushing off sentencing until after the election, that is a political choice, right? Like, that is interfering in the election by depriving the voters of a piece of information that they otherwise would have had in the ordinary course of events, right? Which is, the sentencing would take place, and then they could take that into account.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think that we're making similar arguments. I think Judge Tanya Chutkan, who is, presiding over the DC election interference case, which has just resumed, said something, in the hearing last week with John Lauro, who's Trump's lawyer, and John Lauro said, this is a very sensitive political event, one of a kind in history. And she said, no, this is a criminal trial with 4-count criminal indictment, and I'm just going to have to treat it like I would treat anything else. Although that was said at an arraignment that was waived. Trump's appearance has been waived at all of those hearings, which is a political deference thing. But I do think that the appropriate thing would be not to move it with respect to the political calendar.
Yeah, I will say, if you are looking for a silver lining, maybe you'll disagree with me on this one as well, but I think, and again, you don't want to read too much into trying to read tea leaves, but to me, this makes it more likely than a week ago that Justice Merchan is considering a carceral sentence for Donald Trump, right? As if he was just going to give probation or a fine or something, then just do it on September 18th. That wouldn't interfere with the election at all.
I'm not willing to go that far. I mean, you want a tea leaf it? Yeah, that's on you, buddy.
I hear you. And look, you hear the disappointment in our voices. We have seen the stories. A lot of us on the left are angry with Justice Merchan. And from my perspective, maybe I'll go 0 for 3 with you today, Liz. I think he's probably the wrong target, right? Like, there isn't an easy narrative here, but if you're pointing your fingers in any direction, maybe it should be at Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. And that's complicated because, look, we were all pleased with Bragg's prosecution in the Stormy Daniels case, right? Like, his team did an excellent job. But before that, remember, he was the chicken shit that didn't bring the campaign finance charges against Trump. He was the one who gave Alan Weisselberg that unbelievable sweetheart deal. That's the Trump Organization CFO, the guy who knows where all the bodies are buried, who was looking at years in Rikers on his tax evasion charges. And Bragg was just like, oh, I'm going to give you, a couple of months, and by the way, no requirement that you testify in upcoming proceedings. I mean, that was monstrously offensive. I picked a fight with several liberal commentators who shall go nameless here, who said, no, they'll be able to catch him in a perjury trap. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, Bragg gave up a slam dunk tax prosecution. He's going to bring a much harder perjury. No chance. And sure enough, like, Weisselberg was MIA at the Trump prosecution. And anyway, still not over it. My point, to bring this all back. Justice Merchan points the finger at Alvin Bragg directly in his order. Here's what he says. As a threshold matter, this court finds that despite the people's, right, that's Alvin Bragg's office, the district attorney's office of Manhattan, despite the people's stated neutrality, they present concerns in their letter of August 16th, 2024 in a manner which seemingly supports defendant's application for an adjournment. The people certainly do not oppose, and a careful reading of that response can fairly be construed as a joinder of the motion, that is Trump's motion to postpone. And then there's a discussion of the procedural history. We don't need to get that far into the weeds here. But look, in fairness to Alvin Bragg, we didn't read it that way at the time. But in fairness to Justice Merchan, the DA's office could have been clear in their opposition that they opposed any further delay. Like, they were very clear when they opposed Trump's efforts to lift the gag order, right? And they didn't. And today, Bragg filed an opposition in the Second Circuit. That's in connection with Trump's idiotic efforts to try and remove this case to federal court. And they say in that pleading that relief, quote, is unnecessary in light of the state criminal court's adjournment of the sentencing, end of quote, which tells you that they're not going to oppose it. So, it seems like we know where to point the finger.
Yep. 0 for 3. 0 for 3. You are correct. We are 0 for 3.
All right.
I could not, I disagree with every single piece of what you said there.
Outstanding.
I do not think that this is the district attorney's fault. I do think that racing to the sentencing I don't think there's any political juice to be squeezed out of it. And I don't think that there should be any political juice to be squeezed out of it. Like, it doesn't matter. The guy's already convicted. I don't think that the district attorney had any obligation to say, no, you have to sentence this guy before the election. That, again, would be a political statement. Like, whether he's sentenced in September or November should be of no moment to the prosecution. And to be clear, I don't think he's going to get a carceral sentence. He's like an 80-year-old first-time offender. He's not going to get a carceral sentence. And since we're doing the I disagree with everything that you said, I'm not with you on your bloodlust to lock up Alan Weisselberg. Like, the guy went to Rikers twice to protect Trump. There was nothing
for like
you
a
were
week and a
do
half
to him. No, he went for longer than that. He went for like 4 months or something. Look, the man is old and he went to Rikers, and Rikers is a terrible, inhumane place where they should not place human beings. So I'm going to save the liberal cred of this show. Don't say another word. We are still liberals on this. We are not bloodlust conservatives. Shh.
I could not disagree more with what you
Nope.
said. Like, I don't think there's a get out of jail free card because you're old. I'm not talking about Alvin Bragg racing to sentencing. I'm talking about him not giving a delay that the office wouldn't give to a John Smith who would be here, right? And I also think that when you're talking about considering whether to impose a carceral sentence, you look at the unique circumstances of each defendant. And Trump's behavior was remorseless, right? And the one thing that is absolutely certain in our system of justice, judges left, right, center, when you stroll into court and you say, I didn't do it, and I would do it again, and I'm not wrong, and the whole system's wrong. That's when you get the book thrown at you. And so I just want to see Trump treated like any other criminal defendant here. I don't want him getting an extra bonus couple of months. I think it does make a difference, particularly if he wins the election. And I think that Justice Merchan got bullied here. So we'll have to leave it at that, I guess. You want the last word? I'll give you.
No, this you can be Hannity and I'll be Combs.
Okay.
Oh.
that was a much more cutting last word than you could have possibly said.
All right. It's Tuesday. We're going to thank our patrons.
Yep. A big thank you over on Substack to Emily Myth, John Hannum, and Paul Lasswell.
And over at Patreon, thank you to Shalane Giles, SWTOR Jedi 32. Sorry if I mispronounced it. I am not familiar with this dialect. Alias Inc., Michael Dixon, Matthew Osterhaus, and Van Noble. Thank you guys so very much. As you guys know, subscribers over at patreon.com/lawandchaospod or on lawandchaospod.com get the show ad-free. They get bonus content and they get our everlasting gratitude. We're grateful to all of you, but some people just get a little extra love. All right, for everyone else, we will be right back after we pay some bills. And we're back. So Friday, we talked about the DOJ's indictment of 2 Russian agents for money laundering and conspiracy to violate the Foreign Agents Registration Act by injecting pro-Russia, anti-Ukraine content into the American media bloodstream. These agents also boosted Trump, denigrated Democrats, and generally promoted civil unrest and division in America. And this thing's got a lot of levels. Like the indictment itself is super interesting. What it says about Russians trying to interfere in our political process is interesting. What it says about the American right is interesting. And the timing of it is very interesting.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that last part because, lest we forget, Barack Obama wanted to issue a public warning about the Russian efforts to seed social media with anti-Hillary, pro-Bernie content. And that was after Hillary Clinton had won the nomination, right? Sowing dissension among Democrats in 2016. And Mitch McConnell took him to the woodshed and threatened to call him a liar and accuse him of politicizing the evidence. And I think, given the general Democratic thought process of, we're about to stroll to an electoral college landslide, that, he backed down, and we're not backing down this time.
Yeah, 100% agree. Dropping this now was a choice by the Justice Department, and I'm good with it.
Yeah,
okay,
too.
Let's talk about the indictment. The 2 indictees are Konstantin Kalashnikov, a.k.a. Kostya, and Elena Afanasieva, I hope that's pronounced right, both of whom are employed by RT, formerly Russia Today. It's a Kremlin-backed media outlet that, until 2022, employed a lot of right-wing media types who had sort of bombed out of normie conservative outlets here and around the world. Those included Ed Schultz and, oddly enough, Larry King. RT's parent company is something called TV Novosti, which is itself an offshoot of the Russian state-owned news agency RIA Novosti. So, long story short, RT is a Russian propaganda outlet, and, they're pretty open about that. In 2021, its editor-in-chief, Margarita Simonian, said that the channel was, quote, waging an information war and with the entire Western world. She goes on TV a lot in Russia. There's a reporter named Julia Davis who translated, and Simonian basically says that every night on Russian television. But in 2017, after the Russian interference in the 2016 election, RT was forced to register in the U.S. as a foreign agent. And then in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine again, it basically got deplatformed in America, the EU, the UK, and Canada. So it's booted off of YouTube. It's, gone from the Apple Store. It is functionally gone in America. But Simonian bragged that it was fine because RT had, quote, an enormous network, an entire empire of covert projects that it is working with public opinion, bringing truth to Western audiences.
Yeah, and, way to say the quiet part out loud, right? Like, you may infer from that this indictment that we're about to talk about is not the only operation that RT had going in the United States.
Yeah, put a pin in that one, because I think we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But Kalashnikov and Afanasieva were tasked with running one of these covert ops. So in December of 2022, 3 unnamed RT employees used fake personas to reach out to Lauren Chen and her husband, Liam Donovan. These are 2 Canadian millennials who are longtime passengers on the conservative media grift train. I believe that Chen goes by something called like roaming millennial or something. In fact, Chen has done appearances on RT and generated paid content for that network before it got shut down. So she was a known quantity to them, and they were to her as well.
Yeah, and that is just a little bit of foreshadowing, one of the many, many things that suggest that Lauren Chen knew exactly who was backing the dump trucks of cash that we're about to talk about and, unloading them on her doorstep.
So, in early 2023, Chen starts providing, quote, influencer talent scouting services to what the indictment refers to as Persona 1, Persona 2, and Persona 3, who, again, are billing themselves as French representatives of a Belgian businessman named Edouard Grigorian. And they pay Chen $8,000 a month through a Hungarian shell company to find conservative influencers to populate a new YouTube channel they want to set up. So Chen and her husband duly set up Tenant Media, which is a Tennessee company that bills itself as, quote, a network of heterodox commentators that focus on Western political and cultural issues.
I mean, I guess heterodox is a better sounding word than batshit, right? And I guess, more to the point, it sounds better than Russian propaganda.
Right. But that's how we know who they are, because the DOJ quoted that heterodox thing in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Googling led it to Tenet's site, which is still live as of this recording, although the company was reportedly shut down when the indictment dropped, and Chen was fired from her job at Glenn Beck's The Blaze. So sad. But back in 2023, Chen reached out to Benny Johnson and Tim Pool, who are 2 conservative dipshits. And it's kind of interesting, like speaking of heterodox, how these guys both started out as sort of normal journalism or journalism adjacent guys. And then they veered off into crazy town because that's where they keep the money. So Johnson was a BuzzFeed reporter in the site's heyday, but he got fired in 2012 for plagiarism. And then he got fired from the International Journalism Review for, hold on to your hats, kids, plagiarism, and also for promoting conspiracy hoaxes and for being an asshole. After which he did the Daily Caller and Newsmax and then podcasting, where he's become a hugely influential wingnut liar. Tim Pool was a live streamer during the Occupy Wall Street protests, which he parlayed into gigs at Vice and then Fusion, and then he became a right-wing podcaster because, again, that's where they keep the money. And that's how they became Commentator 1 and Commentator 3, making $100,000 a week to license content to a Russian front.
Yeah, this is all in paragraphs 20A and B of the indictment. So Poole had to produce 4 weekly videos in exchange for $400,000 a month. He also got a $100,000 signing bonus. And then Commentator 2 got paid $100,000 a video.
Yeah, it's not clear to me whether that's Benny Johnson or Dave Rubin, but all of these people made a shit ton of money.
Yeah. And when you say that, paragraph 39 adds up all of the incoming wires from Russia, whether directly or run through various dummy accounts. It is $9.7 million, which is 90% of all of the money that was ever deposited into the Tenet U.S. bank account. So in other words, the Russians were paying these guys 10 times what they would have otherwise earned in ad revenue. So, Liz, if you ever wanted to sell out, like, we are definitely on the wrong platform.
Yeah. You know, my pop-pop's mother used to hide him in the outhouse from the Cossacks in the spring so they wouldn't cut his head off, like literally. Yeah. Oddly enough, the town that he left is now in Ukraine. But my point is, I am not likely to work for RT for any money, TYVM.
Well, I did say if, but, you know, from my perspective, there's always the lucrative former atheist turned evangelical Christian grift for me, which, you know, now that I think about it, is probably also bankrolled by the Russians. So, yeah, we're both just going to have to turn it down.
Yeah, you don't want to go to those Christian influencer parties anyway. They're super boring, I hear. Anyway, Chen and Donovan assemble this all-star lineup, including Dave Rubin, Lauren Southern, Matt Christensen, and Taylor Hansen. These are all gross right-wing shitsters. They're dedicated to tearing the country apart for greasy piles of cash. Third verse, same as the first. And I do not mean that, like, sarcastically. In this world, they are superstars. So Rubin is the only one who apparently Googled this guy, Eduard Grigorian, and figured out that he didn't exist. Rubin was eventually fobbed off with a hilariously phony resume, although the resume mentioned something about social justice, and that seemed a little pinko squish, so Dave had to take a phone call with Grigorian personally, but not over Zoom or anything, because that would leave a mark. You know, that would be a record of like where it came from. So they had to do it through some voice over IP protocol that was untraceable. Presumably that call was not recorded, but if so, that's going to be an amazing exhibit in this case. And look, maybe we didn't make it 100% clear. It should be pointed out that this was in no way, shape, or form ever going to be a money-making venture. Chen told the French investors upfront, we will never recoup in ad revenue the cost of hiring these jackasses. And the RT guys were like, yes, no problem. Do it anyway. We will find the money.
Yeah, and if you're still keeping notes like some of us as to evidence that Chen knew this was not a business at all, that it was a Russian front, like add another hash mark.
So then in mid-2023, the Russians running Chen and Donovan say they want the couple to coordinate the channel with a Russian management and marketing firm, to which Chen says that she's, quote, happy to work with the Russian firm.
Yeah, I hope you didn't put your pencil away, right? Like the indictment has all these messages between Chen and Donovan where they joke that they've got to send a bill to the Russians. Although, you know, I guess if I were their lawyer, and I would never be. I suppose I'd argue that this was a joke or them kind of confusing the marketing firm and Gregorian. I don't think it would work, but, particularly since they're constantly having difficulty reaching their supposedly French contacts and Googling what time is it in Moscow, which suggests that they were not confused and not joking.
Yeah. So basically the French personas set the operation up, and then they left it in the hands of Kalashnikov and Afanasyeva, who were respectively 31 and 27 and as of today, so pretty young. And those two run this thing through a series of Discord servers. And if Discord servers mean nothing to you, just think internet chat rooms, and also don't forget to schedule your colonoscopy. So Kalashnikov poses as the editor hired by the French owners, and Afanasyeva poses as a couple of assistants. She has two personas in this scheme. And together, the three of them press Tenet and its commentators to share footage produced by RT for the purpose of, airing it and infecting American social media. And they asked them to parrot Russian talking points while generally promoting, civil discord and Trump's electoral prospects. Most famously, they talked Chen into posting this video of Tucker Carlson getting radicalized in a Moscow supermarket.
Cough drops, Mentos. Looks pretty non-sanctioned to me, but what do I know? I went from amused to legitimately angry. So we were guessing what this would cost. Everybody hears from the United States, buys groceries, and we didn't pay any attention to costs as we were just putting in the cart what we would actually eat over a week. And we all came in around $400, about $400. It was $104 US here. And that's when you start to realize that ideology maybe doesn't matter as much as you thought, corruption. If you take people's standard of living and you tank it through filth and crime and inflation, and they literally can't buy the groceries they want, at that point, maybe it matters less what you say or whether you're a good person or a bad person. You're wrecking people's lives in their country, and that's what our leaders have done to us. And coming to a Russian grocery store, the heart of evil, and seeing what things cost and how people live, it will radicalize you against our leaders. That's how I feel anyway, radicalized. We're not making any of this up, by the way, at all.
Yeah, I love how the producer was like, really? This kind of sounds like overt shilling. And Donovan says, well, Lauren says we should run it. And then they do. And at some point, they just turn the back end over to the Russian marketing firm and, let it post videos directly to the channel. So I also like this passage from the indictment, which says, on or about March 23rd, 2024, Afanasyeva, as one of her personas, Helena Shudra, privately messaged Chen on Discord asking that one of our creators record something about the Moscow terror attack. Despite public reporting that the foreign terrorist organization ISIS had claimed responsibility for the attack, Afanasyeva requested that Tenet blame Ukraine and the United States, writing, I think we can focus on the Ukraine-US angle. The mainstream media spread fake news that ISIS claimed responsibility for the attack, yet ISIS itself never made such statements. All terrorists are now detained while they were heading to the border with Ukraine, which makes it even more suspicious. Why would they want to go to Ukraine to hide? Chen responded that she would ask Johnson, and the next day confirmed that Johnson said he's happy to cover it.
Yeah, and, let's listen to how happy our buddy Benny was.
The terrorist attack on the venue, the police and personnel being assembled to reinforce security in the city. So the U.S. State Department did warn for people to avoid large gatherings over the next 48 hours in Moscow, Russia. Embassy is monitoring reports of extremists and imminent plans to target large gatherings in Moscow, include concerts. U.S. citizens be advised to avoid large gatherings. So this is public. 2 weeks ago, U.S. Embassy in Moscow warned against imminent attacks by Islamic extremists. And ladies and gentlemen, here we are. So again, I do not know who the extremists are, but the American Embassy was warning against it, along with John Kirby.
Hopefully you saw our the State Department, our embassy there, put out a notice to all Americans in Moscow to avoid any large gathering, concerts, obviously shopping malls, anything like that, just for their own safety. They should.
Do you notice so this was a concert and a shopping mall, and you notice John Kirby says avoid concerts and shopping malls. Little too on the nose for me. Little too on the nose for me, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. Look, I'm not sure whether Benny can claim to be smart enough to know that he was being played, but here's a passage which suggests again that Chen and Donovan were either willfully blind or deliberately ignorant. U.S. Company 1 received its 30 inbound wire transfers from 7 foreign entities, none of which were U.S. Company 1, that's Tenet's contract counterparty. 3 of the remitting entities, Turkish Shell Entity 1 through Turkish Shell Entity 3, listed identical addresses at an office building in Istanbul, Turkey. 3 of the remitting entities, UAE Shell Entity 1, UAE Shell Entity 2, UAE Shell Entity 3, listed different addresses in Dubai and Ras Al Khaimah, United Arab Emirates. And the last remitting entity, Mauritius Shell Entity 1, listed an address in Mauritius. Of the 7 foreign entities, only UAE Shell Entity 1, UAE Shell Entity 2, and Mauritius Shell Entity 1 have websites. Like the website of Czech Shell Entity 1, the websites of UAE Shell Entity 1, UAE Shell Entity 2, and Mauritius Shell Entity 1 reflect seemingly odd and inconsistent information. For example, Mauritius Shell Entity 1 appears to maintain 2 websites using nearly identical domain names. One claims to supply agricultural products, and the other purports to be a digital marketing agency. As another example, the website of UAE Shell Entity 1 states in part, "Our company is always happy to create and implement new projects on the market. We are ready to provide a full range of services from creating a project to bringing it to the world's top ratings." And the website of UAE Shell Entity 2 claims to provide a random array of services, ranging from construction projects to analysis of investment attractiveness to yacht consultancy, as well as the sale of textile products, electronic goods, and jewelry.
Yeah, if you've ever gotten an email from a Nigerian prince who just needs to get out of the country, right, like that, this is not difficult to parse. And I will be super interested if and when this goes forward to see all the ways that this tripped wires on its way to the FBI. Like, look, all of these foreign transactions from obviously fake shell companies in random locations to a U.S. media company had to throw up red flags everywhere. Oh, and by the way, we should mention that most of the checks coming into Chen's companies had in the subject line, they were for stuff like car parts and electronics. Like, if that's on the memo line of your check, like, that's not what you billed for.
Yeah, and we don't have time to get into it, but Chen seemed pretty careful about invoicing for the talent, that is to pay Benny, Timmy, and Davey, and whatever, through the U.S. company. But she and her hubby got paid in Canada, and perhaps that could be tax purposes, but it also could be some kind of consciousness here. But okay, let's spend a minute looking at the charges, and then we can talk about who else might be getting a visit from the FBI here.
Yeah, so the indictment charges Kalashnikov and Afanasyeva with 2 counts of conspiracy. Count 1 is conspiracy to violate the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA, and count 2 is conspiracy to commit money laundering. In general, and it's true for both of these charges, under federal law, conspiracy to commit an offense carries with it the same penalties as having committed the offense itself. And we're going to break those down for you on the other side of this ad break, unless you are a patron or supporter over at patreon.com/lawandchaospod or at lawandchaospod.com on Substack, at which point no ads for you. And we're back. Okay, let's start with count 2 because that's the more straightforward one, right? The operative statute for money laundering is 18 U.S.C. section 1956, which it covers a variety of money laundering crimes. The relevant subsection that's charged here is 1956 A2A, which says, whoever transports, transmits, or transfers funds from a place in the United States to or through a place outside the United States, or to a place inside the United States from or through a place outside the United States, with the intent to promote the carrying on of specified unlawful activity, shall be sentenced to a fine of not more than twice the value of the monetary instrument or funds involved, or imprisonment for not more than 20 years, or both.
Right. So that is moving foreign money either into or out of the United States for the purpose of carrying on unlawful activity. Here, the indictment alleges the conspiracy to move money in both directions in paragraph 50. And we actually kind of fell down a little rabbit hole trying to figure out what that was, because the indictment contains a lengthy facts section about the money coming in to the U.S. from Russia. But nowhere does it allege that Kostya and Lena moved any money out of the U.S., although, maybe that was Donovan and Chen moving money back and forth. It's unclear. But as far as we can tell, the way to put that together is that this is a conspiracy count. So no money had to move out of the U.S. yet. Tenet's parent company is based in Canada with a Canadian bank account, and Donovan and Chen are Canadian nationals, so there's probably enough to sustain the conspiracy to eventually funnel some of those funds out of the U.S. to Canada. But there's definitely no money moving from the U.S. to Russia or any of the other foreign shell companies.
Yeah, this is Russia buying our right-wing weirdos. And the underlying unlawful activity in that is the intent to promote violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act that's charged in count 1 that we're about to discuss, right? So the reason that you would charge 2 separate counts, right, that you'd also add the money laundering count, is the civil forfeiture provisions. You can seize any or all of the remaining assets from the bank account. And you have the civil fines, which can be twice the amounts involved, or $20 million. So, but from a criminal responsibility standpoint, the entire indictment then rises and falls on FARA, right, on the Foreign Agents Registration Act. So let's talk about it, because for about a century now, we've known that hostile foreign powers can leverage the country's wealth to either buy corrupt politicians directly or, easier, right, hire out those politicians' buddies and then let those guys do the work, right? The Nazis did that here in the 1930s. And that's why, in response to that, covert Nazi propaganda trying to infiltrate and target our elected officials, Congress passed the Foreign Agents Registration Act in 1938.
Right. So the solution we came up here was pretty bare bones, right? We do have a First Amendment. So all we said is you have to disclose. So now, if you work on behalf of a foreign government, you have to file a report saying who that government is and how much they're paying you and what lobbying efforts you are undertaking on that government's behalf.
Right. So today, FARA is codified at 22 U.S.C. section 611 et sec, right? That section of the code is titled Registration of Foreign Propagandists, right? So, not subtle about what they're going after here. And in relevant parts, section 612 says, no person shall act as an agent of a foreign principal unless he has filed with the Attorney General a true and complete registration statement and supplements thereto with the information you've described. You have to actually attach the contracts, right? Like you just have to turn over that information. You have to be upfront about what you're doing.
Right. And that's it, right? That's all the law requires. You just have to be honest. And it's up to the politicians being lobbied and the public to care about whether someone is a paid stooge of a hostile foreign power or not. So a lot of people think FARA doesn't go far enough. But for the purposes of today's story, let's talk about the persistent and deliberate failures of foreign lobbyists to disclose their connections, because there's a lot of that going around. Yeah. Under Section 618, willful failure to file your registration statement, willfully making any false statement in your registration statement, or willfully omitting any material fact or a fact or document necessary to make the statements that you say not misleading, right? You can't deliberately mislead. All of that is a felony. It's punishable by a fine of not more than $10,000 or imprisonment of not more than 5 years or both.
Yeah. And Poole, Johnson, and Rubin never registered under FARA, right? And Liz, you're going to talk about their protestations of innocence in a minute, but that it's not germane to the indictment whether they were fooled or whether they did it deliberately. Like, those right-wing pundits were paid by Russia for the treasonous garbage that they cranked out at Tenet, right? That means Tenet and its principals, Lauren and Liam, were also required to register under FARA, and they didn't. So regardless of who was in it versus who was duped, the conspiracy that's at the core of this indictment was to prevent the government, the U.S. government, from being able to identify the source of the money being paid to those guys. And that's a crime.
Right. And let's be clear. All of those shell companies were very clearly for the purpose of obscuring the source of the money. And no person looking at being paid by, shell companies in 5 countries or whatever would believe anything but, right? It's preposterous to suggest that they didn't know that there was, they could perhaps colorably say they didn't know it was Russia, but they could not colorably say that this wasn't a deliberate attempt to hide who was paying them.
Yeah, and they haven't made this argument yet, but I do want to kind of front it, and that is for a long time, right? For much of its history, FARA wasn't really enforced that often. But then the 2016 election happened, and I know we're the crazy leftists, but let's go to the report of the then Republican Senate Intelligence Committee, chaired by then North Carolina Senator Richard Burr, Republican of North Carolina, in 2019. That report said, the committee found that Russian President Vladimir Putin personally ordered the Russian effort to hack computer networks and accounts affiliated with the Democratic Party and leak information damaging to Hillary Clinton and her campaign for president. Moscow's intent was to harm the Clinton campaign, tarnish an expected presidential administration, help the Trump campaign after Trump became the presumptive Republican nominee, and undermine the U.S. democratic process. And that continued. They didn't stop doing that after it worked in 2016.
I was reliably informed, no Russia, you, Hillary Clinton, are the Russia.
Yeah. I mean, Trump bleats out Russia hoax every single day, and it was not a hoax.
Yeah, well, there was that time that he said, Russia, if you're listening, and asked them to hack Hillary Clinton's emails, and then they did.
Yeah. Here's what the, again, 2019 Republican Senate Intelligence Committee said. While the Russian GRU and WikiLeaks were releasing hacked documents, the Trump campaign sought to maximize the impact of those leaks to aid Trump's electoral process. Staff on the Trump campaign sought advance notice about WikiLeaks releases, created messaging strategies to promote and share the materials in anticipation of and following their release, and encouraged further leaks. The Trump campaign publicly undermined the attribution of the hack and leak campaign to Russia and was indifferent as to whether it and WikiLeaks were furthering Russian election interference efforts. And then the Republicans on the committee craft this super narrow language to try and get Trump off the hook in terms of actually concluding that he committed a crime, which would have obligated them to make referrals to the Department of Justice. So here's what they said. See if you can spot the slippage. The committee found no evidence that Trump campaign officials received an authoritative government notification that the hack was perpetrated by the Russian government before October 7th, 2016, when the Office of Director of National Intelligence and the Department of Homeland Security issued a joint statement to that effect.
Okay. As a person who covered all that in real time, it's a lot. So I'm going to unpack it and, it's going to take a minute, but we're all here. On June 3rd, 2017, a music promoter named Rob Goldstone emailed Donald Trump Jr. with promises to, quote, provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information from the Russian government that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to your father. So Jr. replied to that email within minutes with the infamous, if it's what you say, I love it, especially late in the summer. And then Goldstone says a Russian government attorney will meet with them in Trump Tower in New York. So 6 days later, that attorney, Natalia Veselnitskaya, whose name I can still type without like a second because I have written about her a lot. So Natalia Veselnitskaya met with Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner and Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, at Trump Tower. And look, remember, Paul Manafort had spent quite a lot of time rat-fucking in Eastern Europe, and he knew who he was sitting down with. Mm-hmm. So, okay, nothing really comes of this meeting. Later, when he's asked about it, Donald Trump Jr. says that it was to discuss adoptions of Russian children, which is true in only the most convoluted sense, because Obama had slapped sanctions on Russian oligarchs. It was Magnitsky sanctions. You can look it up. We're going to take a long enough rabbit trail, but that was for Sergei Magnitsky. Russia responded by cutting off the flow of babies to American adoptive parents. Russia wanted to get those sanctions lifted because it's hard out there for an oligarch who can't take his money out of Mother Russia. And so the Russians told Trump that they had dirt on Hillary that they would trade for promised sanctions relief. And they were super open to it, the Trump campaign. So in July of 2017, Don Jr. finally admitted on Twitter, since he knew that it was about to be reported, that what the real substance of this meeting was. And that gave rise to a classic journalism meme. After Jared Yates Sexton, he's a reporter, tweeted, "I worked on this story for a year," and he just tweeted it out. So there we are.
I love the refresh. I mean, they do say I go down rabbit trails.
Yeah, well, I did manage to stay in this century.
All right, that's stay frosty.
We didn't
there,
go back
Liz.
to the 13th century, buddy.
Look, the point is, the language in the Senate intelligence report is very careful, right? They could not prove that Veselnitskaya conveyed authoritative notification directly from Putin directly to Trump, right? But look, Trump also had direct information from our intelligence community in October that he was doing the bidding of our geostrategic rival.
Right. Like, to be clear, the FBI came and met with the Trump campaign and was like, hey, the Russians are trying to play footsie with you. You are in the middle of a Russian influence operation. And he was like, you're probably just Clinton lovers. Screw you.
Fake news, right? Yeah. Look, there is so much more we could go on about this story, but let's cut to the chase as is relevant to this indictment, because in that report, which is 5 volumes, some of which are 900 pages long, like it's comprehensive. You and I have read all of them. But here's the final recommendations, again, right, of this Republican Senate Intelligence Committee. It says, the committee recommends that Congress update the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, and that the DOJ clarify the statute's requirements by issuing public guidance on enforcement, which they did, and more stringently enforcing the existing statute. So in other words, this indictment is not the work of, crazed anti-Trump Democrat, communist, whatever Trump is going to say about that. This is activity that was urged by rock-ribbed conservative Republicans, many of whom voted against impeaching Trump, right? Like, one of them was Marco Rubio on this committee, right? He actively sought to be Donald Trump's running mate. Yeah.
Right. And how's this for Prussian? I mean, here's Senator Ron Wyden. He's a Democrat from Oregon. In the Minorities Report, he said in 2019, the Russians were prepared to publicly call into question the validity of the results, that is, of the 2016 election, and pro-Kremlin bloggers had prepared a Twitter campaign, #DemocracyRIP, on election night in anticipation of Secretary Clinton's victory. This plan highlights why nationwide election cybersecurity standards are so critical. If Russia's preferred candidate does not prevail in the 2020 election, the Russians may seek to delegitimize the election.
Wow. Yeah. I don't think I can add anything to what Senator Wyden said.
Yeah. So, look, long story short, the Foreign Agents Registration Act is a real law, and it has been grossly violated by these Russian agents. You may think it has been violated by Chen and Donovan. That remains to be seen. They have not as yet been arrested. But I think that there's probably not going to be charges against the dipshit commentators. But let's go to them, because they have thoughts. Here's what Tim Pool said. Should these allegations prove true, I, as well as the other personalities and commentators, were deceived and are victims. Very rich victims.
Yeah.
I cannot speak for anyone else at the company as to what they do or to what they are instructed. The Culture War podcast, that's actually what it's called, was licensed by Tenet Media. It existed well before any license agreement with Tenet, and it will continue to exist after any such agreement expires. The only change with the agreement was that the location of the live broadcast moved to Tenet's YouTube channel. I and TCW never produced any content for Tenet Media. Goes on to say some other nonsense. He finishes by saying, Putin is a scumbag, Russia sucks donkey balls, and to the journalists who wish to jump the gun, create their own narrative, or lie about what is currently going on, you can eat my Irish ass. I feel like he's talking to you and me. And
maybe
that's
overcompensating a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, whatever, beanie man. He does wear a beanie all the time. Anyway,
Sure.
Listen, as he said, the man said, he never created pro-Russia content. He just said it for himself.
But I don't know that it matters anymore. This is psychotic. Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy, being funded by the Democrats. I will stress this again. One of the greatest enemies of our nation right now is Ukraine. They are expanding this war. Now, don't get me wrong. I know you've got criminal elements of the U.S. government pushing them and guiding them and telling them what to do. Ukraine is now accused, a German warrant issued for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, triggering this conflict. Ukraine is the greatest threat to this nation and to the world. We should rescind all funding and financing, pull out all military support, and we should apologize to Russia.
Yeah, there is a lot to unpack there. I mean, look, these are the people who have told you for years that the Russian influence operation to boost Trump was a hoax. And Robert Mueller should go to jail along with Hillary and Rod Rosenstein and who else, right? And here they are smack in the middle of just such an operation. And they can't even spot it, right? Like, so either they are the biggest dumbasses on earth, or they are absolute liars. Probably both, right, to be honest. And then Poole admits that everything he says, all of that pro-Putin bullshit was his own stuff, right? Like, look, if I had been caught trumpeting pro-Kremlin talking points, I guess saying I did it of my own volition is slightly less worse than saying I got paid $100,000 a throw to say stuff by the FSB.
Yeah, he's a peach. Johnson, here's what Johnson had to say. A statement on the leaked DOJ indictment today. I don't, do you think that's leaking when you put it on the public docket?
Yeah.
All right. He says, a year ago, a media startup pitched my company to provide content as an independent contractor. Our lawyers negotiated a standard arm's length deal, which was later terminated. We are disturbed by the allegations in today's indictment, which make clear that myself and other influencers were victims in this alleged scheme. My lawyers will handle anyone who states or suggests otherwise. Okay, Benny. Did you copy that from somebody, or did you come up with that all by yourself, too? And let's just finish with a public tweet from one Harmeet K. Dillon. She's a lawyer to the Republican, superstars. Well, she really does represent. Actually, she represents Elon Musk, and she represents Trump. And
she's still terrible at her job. Like,
she's so terrible. Yeah, for sure. Anyway, she says, remember, friends, don't talk to law enforcement without counsel. Just trust me on this. This is what she said a couple days before the indictment dropped. And
I mean, don't take legal advice from a podcast or from Harmeet Dillon or anything.
Well, that's not terrible legal advice. That's not terrible legal
outstanding
advice.
Hypothetical legal advice. Yeah.
I think it's really very interesting, the timing of it. And actually, Dan Bongino, I'm not going to dig up the clip because screw that guy. But Dan Bongino was out there being like, don't anybody talk. I mean, don't anybody talk. I'm a former Secret Service agent. Don't anybody say nothing to the feds on his show. So I feel like, you know how you said that there might be some other people who are some similar covert influence operations? I'm thinking that these turds are not the only turds floating around the punch bowl, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. We got some advance notice of that when you read paragraph 8 of this indictment, because in the background section, right, as it's explaining who these folks are, it says Kalashnikov has identified himself as the deputy chief of the digital media projects department for RT, is a member of an integral RT email distribution list reserved for leaders at RT, and manages multiple RT covert distribution channels in the United States, including U.S. Company One. And Liz, the second you spotted that, you started excitedly texting me saying, this means that the DOJ and the FBI are aware of more than just Tenet, right? Like, you don't say multiple, including if there's only the one.
Uh-huh. And just as an aside, the fact that this guy's name is Kalashnikov, like, are we living in a broken simulation or what?
Yeah, this would be rejected as alien space bats in the alt history community, but yeah.
All right. That is going to do it for us today, unless you are a Patreon, in which case we are going to talk about the other Justice Department announcement of an enforcement action against Russian interferers. It's called Operation Doppelganger. You could hear about it now if you are a subscriber at patreon.com/lawandchaospod or at lawandchaospod.com. And if you are not, or even if you are, you could do something super nice for us today by leaving us a 5-star review on your platform of choice. That's going to do it for us today. We will be back on Thursday with written content and on Friday with another show. Thanks so much, you guys.
Law and Chaos Podcast is a production of Raise Up to Media, LLC, is intended solely as entertainment, does not constitute legal advice, and does not form an attorney-client relationship. This show is researched and written by Liz Dye and produced by Bryce Blankenagel. Law and Chaos Pod, copyright 2024, Raise Up to Media, LLC, all rights reserved.
Shopify's point-of-sale system helps you sell at every stage of your business. Need a fast and secure way to take payments in person? We've got you covered. How about card readers you can rely on anywhere you sell?
Thanks. Have a good one.
Yep, that too. Want one place to manage all your online and in-person sales? That's kind of our thing. Wherever you sell, businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 a month trial at shopify.com/listen. Shopify.com/listen.